My son showed up unannounced, smiling too much, saying he just wanted to check my old car and make sure it was still safe. Something in his voice felt wrong. After he left, I crawled underneath the vehicle, and what I found changed everything. A tracker, hidden, active. Instead of confronting him, I made a choice that would expose the truth. I removed it, boxed it up, and mailed it to Canada. 12 hours later, my phone rang. The voice on the other end didn't ask questions. It made demands. And in that moment, I realized my own son had pulled me into something far darker than I ever imagined. Welcome and thank you for being here with me. Before we go any further, take a second and tell me in the comments where you're listening from. I read everyone. And just so we're clear, parts of this story are dramatized for storytelling and educational purposes. Any resemblance to real people or places is coincidental, but the message behind it is absolutely real. It was a Tuesday afternoon when the gravel in my driveway crunched under the tires of a luxury SUV. I did not need to look out the window to know who it was. My son, Lucas. He had not visited my house in 6 months, not since Christmas, and even then he spent the whole time checking his watch. But today he was here unannounced, standing on my porch, with a smile that did not quite reach his eyes. I opened the door, and the first thing I noticed was the sweat on his forehead. It was only 60 degrees in Detroit, a cool, crisp spring day, but Lucas looked like he had just run a marathon. "Hey, Dad," he said, his voice a little too loud, a little too cheerful. "I was just in the neighborhood. Thought I would stop by and see how you were doing." I leaned against the doorframe, crossing my arms. I am 78 years old. I spent 40 years working as a master electrician for the auto union. I have seen men lie to their bosses, I have seen men lie to their wives, and I have seen men lie to themselves. I know what a liar looks like. Lucas was shifting his weight from one foot to the other, his eyes darting past me into the house. "I am fine, Lucas," I said, keeping my voice flat. "Just fixing the toaster. What brings you all the way out here? Usually you just send a text if you need money." He flinched. The jab landed, but he forced that fake smile back onto his face. "Come on, Dad. It is not like that. I actually came to check on the truck." He pointed toward the garage where my 1972 Ford F-100 sat. "That truck is my pride and joy. I bought it brand new the year Lucas was born. It has 300,000 miles on it, but the engine runs smoother than the plastic toys they manufacture today. I maintain every bolt, every wire, every gasket myself." "The truck is fine," I said. Lucas shook his head, walking past me toward the garage. "You know, Dad, I have been reading about these old brake lines. They rust out from the inside, especially with all the salt on the roads this winter. I just want to take a quick look underneath, for peace of mind. You know, safety first." I followed him into the garage, to the U. The smell of oil and old steel filled the air, a scent that usually calms me. But today it smelled like danger. Lucas was already grabbing the creeper, that flatboard on wheels mechanics use to slide under vehicles. He did not ask for a jack. He did not ask for a flashlight. He just wanted to get under that truck immediately. I stood by the workbench, my hand resting on a heavy wrench. I watched my son, the boy who used to be afraid of the dark, slide his expensive Italian suit trousers onto the dirty creeper and push himself under the chassis of my truck. "I will just check the rear axle," he called out from underneath, his voice echoing slightly. I stayed silent. I closed my eyes and I listened. When you work with machines for 4 decades, your ears become your most valuable tool. You know the sound of a bolt stripping. You know the sound of a wrench hitting metal. And you know the sound of a hand tightening a nut. I waited for the sound of a tool. I waited for the scrape of metal on metal. But that is not what I heard. From under the rear of the truck, near the wheel well, I heard a soft, distinct clunk. It was a dull, heavy sound. The sound of a powerful magnet snapping onto a steel frame. Click, thud, then silence. There was no ratcheting of a wrench, No cursing at a stuck bolt. Just that one singular, suspicious sound. "Looks good," Dad Lucas said, sliding out from under the truck less than 30 seconds later. He stood up, brushing dust off his suit, but he missed a smudge of grease on his elbow. He looked relieved. The sweat on his forehead seemed to have cooled. "Brakes look solid," he said, avoiding my eyes. "You keep her in good shape." I stared at him. I wanted to grab him by the shoulders and shake him. I wanted to scream, asking him what he had just done to the only thing I had left of my past. But I did not. In my line of work, you do not act until you have diagnosed the problem. You do not cut the wire until you know where the current is flowing. "Thanks for checking," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. He did not stay for coffee. He did not ask about my health. He practically ran back to his SUV, mumbling something about a meeting he was late for. I watched him reverse out of the driveway, his tires spinning slightly in the gravel as he sped away. As soon as his taillights disappeared around the bend, I turned back to the garage. I walked over to the wall and pressed the button to close the garage door. The world outside vanished, leaving me alone with my truck and whatever secret it was now carrying. I did not panic. I moved with the slow, deliberate speed of a man who has diffused high-voltage fuse boxes. I grabbed the heavy-duty floor jack and rolled it under the rear differential. I pumped the handle, the hydraulic hiss the only sound in the room, until the rear tires lifted off the concrete. I locked the safety stands in place. Never trust a hydraulic jack with your life, that is rule number 1. Then I grabbed my high-intensity inspection light and lay down on the creeper. I slid under the truck, retracing the path my son had taken. The underside of the Ford was clean coated in the protective oil spray I applied every autumn. I scanned the brake lines. They were perfect, just as I knew they were. I scanned the exhaust pipe. No rust. Then I moved the light to the inside of the rear passenger side wheel well, a place where shadows are deep and hard to see unless you are looking for them. And there it was. Attached to the inner frame rail hidden behind the shock absorber was a black box. It was small, about the size of a deck of cards, but thicker. It was not a cheap plastic gadget you buy at the supermarket to find your lost keys. This was matte black industrial casing with no branding, no logos. I reached out and tugged on it. It did not budge. The magnet was incredibly strong, industrial grade. I had to use a flathead screwdriver to pry it loose. When it finally popped off with a metallic snap, I held it under the light. On the side, a tiny red LED blinked once every 10 seconds. I recognized the technology. Back in the day when I did contract work for some of the government fleets, we saw early versions of this. This was a hardwired GPS tracker with its own independent battery source. It does not need the car's power. It sleeps until it detects motion. Then it wakes up and screams its location to a satellite. My heart sank into my stomach. It felt like I had swallowed a stone. My own son. My own flesh and blood. He did not come here to check my brakes. He came here to tag me like an animal in the wild. Why? Was he trying to steal the truck? It was a classic, but it was not worth a fortune, not enough to ruin a relationship over. Was he worried about my driving? No, if he was worried, he would have taken the keys, not tracked me. This was something else. This was precise. This was desperate. I sat up on the creeper, holding the black box in my grease-stained hand. The little red light blinked at me, mocking me. I could have smashed it with my hammer. That was my first instinct. Smash it into 1,000 pieces, call Lucas, and tell him never to step foot on my property again. But then I thought about the sweat on his forehead. I thought about the fear in his eyes. If he was tracking me, someone was making him do it. Or he was in trouble so deep he needed to know where I was at every second of the day. If I destroyed it, I would learn nothing. I would just be an angry old man in a garage. But if I played along, if I gave the tracker what it wanted, movement, direction, speed, I might flush out the truth. I stood up and walked over to my workbench. I grabbed a roll of heavy-duty lead, flashing the kind used for roofing repairs. Lead blocks signals. If I wrapped it now, the signal would die and Lucas would know I found it. So I did not wrap it. Instead, I found a sturdy cardboard shipping box. I packed the tracker inside, surrounded by bubble wrap so it would not rattle. I grabbed my keys. Not the keys to the truck, but the keys to my beat-up sedan, the one I use for grocery runs. I put the box in the passenger seat. I drove to the FedEx distribution center near the airport. It is the only one open late. The drive took 20 minutes. Every time I hit a bump, I looked at the box, wondering who was watching a dot move on a screen right now. I walked up to the counter. The young woman behind the glass looked tired. "How can I help you, sir?" she asked. "I need to send this package priority overnight," I said. "It needs to move fast, and it needs to go far." "Where to?" I thought for a second. "I have an old fishing buddy named Jacques who lives in Montreal, Canada. We haven't spoken in years, but I still remember his address." "Montreal, Canada," I said. She typed it in. "That will be $80, sir. It will be on the plane in an hour and arrive by tomorrow morning." I paid cash. I watched her slap the label on the box and toss it into the bin behind her. As I walked back to my car, I felt a grim satisfaction. Right now, that tracker was stationary. But in an hour, it would be accelerating down a runway at 150 miles per hour. Then it would be flying at 500 miles per hour, crossing international borders. If Lucas was just worried about his dad driving to the grocery store, he would be confused. But if this was something darker, if this tracker was meant to monitor something valuable, something illegal, then sending it across the border was going to set off every alarm bell in the system. I drove home in silence. I made a pot of coffee and sat in my armchair waiting. I did not have to wait long. 12 hours later, the sun was just starting to peek through the curtains. My phone rang. I looked at the caller ID. It was not Lucas. It was a number I did not recognize. I picked it up and didn't say a word. I just breathed. On the other end, a voice spoke. It was not a human voice. It was digital, distorted, cold, and metallic. "You think you are smart, old man," the voice hissed. "Why is the vehicle moving at 500 miles an hour toward the border? Turn it around. Turn it around now, or I will turn your house into an oven with you inside it." I lowered the phone, my hand trembling, not from fear, but from a cold, hard realization. I had just kicked a hornet's nest, and now the hornets were coming. The morning sun hit the kitchen table, but it brought no warmth. I sat there with a mug of black coffee that had gone cold 10 minutes ago. My eyes were glued to the screen of my tablet. The tracking page for the overnight package refreshed automatically every 60 seconds. At exactly 8:30 in the morning, the status changed from in transit to delivered. Location, Montreal Customs Facility. I let out a breath I did not know I had been holding. The bait had been taken. The tracker was now hundreds of miles away, sitting in a cold government warehouse across an international border. If my suspicion was right, if that device was linked to people who watched screens for a living, the alarm bells were ringing right now. I took a sip of the cold coffee. It tasted bitter, just like the feeling in my gut. I wanted to be wrong. God knows I wanted to be wrong. I wanted Lucas to call me laughing, asking why I mailed his safety device to Canada. I wanted him to tell me it was a prank or a misunderstanding. But I knew better. In 40 years of working with high voltage, knowing when a fuse is about to blow is an instinct, not a guess. The phone rang at 8:32. It was Lucas. I let it ring twice. I needed to compose myself. I needed to bury the father who loved his son and summon the man who survived Detroit in the 70s. I swiped the green button and put the phone to my ear. "Hello, Lucas," I said, my voice calm. "Dad." His voice was a shriek. It cracked like a teenage boy's. "Where are you? Where's the truck?" "I am in the kitchen having coffee," I said slowly. "Why are you screaming? The app says the truck is in Canada. Why is the truck in Canada, Dad?" "What did you do?" I could hear him hyperventilating. I could hear the sound of traffic in the background, meaning he was driving and driving fast. "Oh, that," I said, leaning back in my chair. "I sold it." There was a silence on the other end, so profound, I thought the call had dropped. Then came a sound of pure terror. "You did what?" "I sold it, Lucas. Yesterday evening. After you left, I got to thinking. You were right. That truck is too old. The brakes are rusty. It is not safe for a man my age. So I put a listing up on that collector forum I visit. A guy from Montreal saw it. He offered me $15,000 cash. He sent a flatbed tow truck over within the hour. It is gone." "No. No, no, no." Lucas was sobbing now. "You cannot sell it. You have to get it back. You have to call him right now and get it back." I frowned. The act was getting harder to maintain. Hearing a grown man cry is never easy, especially when you changed his diapers. But the desperation in his voice confirmed everything. He was not worried about my truck. He was terrified of what was inside it. "It is a done deal, Lucas," I said, hardening my heart. "The papers are signed. The title is transferred. Why are you making such a big deal out of this? It is just an old heap of metal. You do not understand." He screamed so loud I had to pull the phone away from my ear. "You killed us. You killed us all. Who is us, Lucas?" But he did not answer. He just kept repeating, "I have to fix this. I have to fix this," over and over again, like a mantra. Then the line went dead. I placed the phone down on the table. My hand was shaking slightly. Not from fear, but from rage. "Us." He said, "us." That meant he was not working alone. That meant my son, the boy I sent to private school, the boy I taught to fish, was in bed with people who made him fear for his life. I stood up and walked to the window. The street outside was quiet. The neighbor was walking her golden retriever. The mailman was making his rounds. It looked like a normal American morning. But I knew the invisible countdown had started. I did not have to wait long for the second shoe to drop. 3 minutes later, the phone rang again. I looked at the screen. Unknown caller. No ID. This was it. I picked it up, but I did not speak. I learned a long time ago that silence is a weapon. It forces the other person to show their hand first. "Listen to me very carefully, old man." The voice was unrecognizable. It was digital, synthesized, processed through a voice changer. It sounded like grinding metal. There was no humanity in it. No inflection, just cold, hard data. "I am listening," I said. "We know you do not have the vehicle. We know you moved the tracker. You think you are clever sending a decoy to the border. But you are playing a game you do not understand." I feigned ignorance. "Who is this? Did you buy the truck from the Canadian guy?" "Cut the act." The voice hissed. "We know the truck never left the state. The weight sensors on the border scales would have flagged it. You sent a box, not a truck." My blood ran cold. I had underestimated them. They were not just watching a GPS dot. They had access to logistics data. They knew exactly what crossed the border and what did not. I stayed silent, letting them fill the void. "You have exactly 4 hours," the voice continued. "We want the truck, and we want the cargo inside the panels, untouched, unopened. If you go to the police, we will know. If you try to run, we will know. And if I don't," I asked, my voice dropping an octave, "then we will not just come for the truck. We will come for the house. We will burn it down with you inside it. And after we are done with you, we will pay a visit to your son. He seems very worried about his father. It would be a shame if he had an accident." Click. The line went dead. I stood there in the middle of my kitchen, the silence ringing in my ears. 4 hours. They gave me a deadline. Most people would panic. Most people would call 911. But I knew that if I called the police now, the first thing they would do is impound the evidence. They would take weeks to investigate, and in that time Lucas would be exposed. Those people on the phone, they were not street thugs. They had access to voice scramblers and border data. They were professionals, and professionals do not leave loose ends. If the police got involved, Lucas was a dead man. I had to handle this myself. I walked over to the front door and engaged the deadbolt. Then I went to the back door and slid the heavy steel rod into the track. I closed the blinds in the living room, casting the house into a gloom that matched my mood. I went to the hall closet. I pushed aside the winter coats that I hadn't worn in years and the vacuum cleaner. In the back corner stood a locked gun safe. I spun the combination dial. Right to 24, left to 10, right to 5. The mechanism clicked open with a solid, heavy sound. Inside, resting against the felt lining, was my Remington 870 Wingmaster. It was an older shotgun, much like my truck. Solid steel and walnut wood. No plastic tactical rails, no flashlights, just reliable American iron. I took it out, feeling the familiar weight in my hands. It smelled of Hop's No. 9 cleaning oil, a scent that reminded me of deer hunting trips in the Upper Peninsula a lifetime ago. I carried it to the kitchen table. I fetched my cleaning kit. Even though I kept it clean, I needed the ritual. I needed to occupy my hands while my mind raced. I disassembled the barrel. I ran a patch through the bore, checking for dust. I lubricated the slide action. Clack, clack. The sound was aggressive, violent, and reassuring. I loaded 5 shells into the tube. Double-aught buckshot. The kind of round that does not ask questions. I sat there, the shotgun across my lap, waiting. They said 4 hours, but they were assuming I was a scared old man who needed time to think. They assumed I would spend the next hour crying or calling my son. They did not know who they were dealing with. I was not going to wait 4 hours. I was not going to wait for them to come to my doorstep and torch the home I built with my late wife. I looked at the clock on the wall. The second hand ticked rhythmically. I needed to move the truck. Not to give it to them, but to use it. They wanted the truck so badly, they were willing to kill for it. That meant the truck was not just a container. It was leverage. But first I needed to know exactly what I was sitting on. I needed to know why my son was willing to sell his soul and why a stranger was willing to burn my house down. I stood up, racking the shotgun one more time just to hear the sound. I grabbed my keys and my heavy canvas coat. I was going to the off-site garage where the real truck was hidden, and I was going to take that vehicle apart piece by piece until I found the devil hiding in the details. If they wanted a war, they were going to get one. But it would be on my terms, not theirs. I opened the back door and stepped out into the cool morning air, my eyes scanning the tree line. The hunt was on. I walked out the back door of my house and did not look back. My sedan was parked 3 blocks away behind an abandoned, overgrown lot. I had learned a long time ago that if you want to disappear, you do not leave from your own driveway. I got into the car and kept the headlights off until I turned onto the main road. My hands were steady on the wheel, but my mind was racing like a turbine engine. I drove toward the industrial district. This part of Detroit is a graveyard of giants. It is where the steel mills and the assembly lines used to roar day and night. Now it is just rust and silence. I have a key to an old Union warehouse down by the river. It is a place the city forgot about. The property taxes have not been paid in a decade, but nobody comes to collect. That is where I keep my real life. That is where I moved the truck 2 days ago because I wanted to change the oil in peace. I pulled the sedan inside the cavernous space and the headlights swept across the concrete floor. There she was. My 1972 Ford F-100, candy apple red paint gleaming under the dust. To anyone else, it was just a classic car, a Sunday driver for an old man. But tonight, it looked different. Tonight, it looked like a Trojan horse. I got out and locked the warehouse door from the inside. The air smelled of old grease and damp concrete. I walked over to the truck and ran my hand along the fender. I felt a pang of guilt. I had protected this machine better than I had protected my own family, and now it seemed both of them were rotten from the inside out. I did not waste time. I walked to my heavy steel toolbox and opened the third drawer. I took out a device that looks like a pistol with a long, flexible black tube attached to the front. It is an industrial endoscope, a camera on a snake. We used to use it to inspect cylinder heads and verify welds inside structural pillars. Today, I was going to use it to perform an autopsy on the thing I loved most. I turned on the screen. The grainy blue light illuminated my face. I started with the obvious spots. I slid the camera probe up the exhaust pipe. Nothing but carbon buildup. I checked inside the frame rails. Just surface rust. I checked the spare tire winch. Clean. Then I moved to the doors. When I opened the driver's side door, it swung out with a heavy, solid thud. I had always admired how solid these old trucks were built. American steel. But as I swung the door back and forth, testing the weight, a nagging suspicion clawed at the back of my neck. It felt too heavy. Not by much, maybe 5 or 10 pounds. But when you have opened a door 10,000 times, your muscle memory knows when the physics are wrong. I knelt down. I took a plastic trim tool and carefully pried back the weather stripping at the bottom of the window. I fed the black snake tube down into the hollow space inside the door. On the screen, I saw the window regulator mechanism. I saw the bottom of the door skin. And then I saw something that did not belong in a 50-year-old truck. Packages. They were wrapped in heavy-duty vacuum-sealed anti-static bags. They were silver and shiny, reflecting the LED light of the camera. They were packed tight, lined up perfectly against the inner skin of the door, secured with industrial adhesive. I felt the bile rise in my throat. I pulled the camera out and grabbed a screwdriver. I did not care about the paint anymore. I jammed the screwdriver behind the beautiful vinyl door panel and ripped it off. The plastic clips snapped like gunshots in the quiet warehouse. I peeled back the moisture barrier, and there they were. 6 packages on this side alone. I took out my pocket knife and sliced one of the bags open. I expected white powder. I expected stacks of cash. That is what you see in the movies. That is what criminals usually traffic. But when I pulled the contents out, it was a circuit board. It was deep green, almost black. It was dense with microchips, gold-plated connectors, and complex wiring that looked like a city map viewed from space. I held it up to the overhead light. I am a master electrician. I know what a consumer circuit board looks like. I know what the inside of a laptop or a car computer looks like. This was not that. The soldering was military grade. The chips had no brand names, just long serial numbers etched in white. This was guidance technology. This was the kind of hardware that tells a missile how to find a heat signature from 50 miles away. This was the kind of hardware that is illegal to own, illegal to sell, and treasonous to export. My knees felt weak. I sat down on the running board of the truck, holding the board in my trembling hands. It all made sense now. The pieces of the puzzle slammed together with a sickening clarity. Why use my truck? Why use me? Because who pulls over a 78-year-old veteran driving a classic American pickup truck? No one. I am the perfect camouflage. I am the invisible man. I could drive this truck right through a police checkpoint, and the officers would salute me and ask about the engine. I could drive this across state lines and nobody would bat an eye. My son and his wife turned me into a mule. They turned my reputation, my service, and my gray hair into a smuggling vessel. They did not just steal my truck. They stole my honor. They were going to let me drive around with federal prison time inside my doors while they sat in their air-conditioned mansion counting the money. The value of what I was holding was not in the thousands. It was in the millions. And the people who wanted it back were not the kind of people who send demand letters. They were the kind of people who erase families. I looked at the circuit board again. I wanted to smash it. I wanted to burn it. But destruction would not save me now. Then the silence of the warehouse was broken. It was faint at first. The sound of a high-performance engine approaching fast, tires crunching on the gravel outside. I froze. I had mailed the tracker to Canada. The truck was invisible electronically. Nobody knew about this warehouse except me and a few dead guys from the union. How did they find me? I reached into my pocket to grab my phone to check the security cameras I had set up at the house. And then I stopped. My phone. I stared at the black screen. I had mailed the tracker. I had hidden the truck. But I had kept my cell phone in my pocket the entire time. I am an idiot. An old foolish idiot. They did not need to track the truck. They tracked me. They pinged my cell phone tower location. They followed the digital breadcrumbs right to my front door. The sound of the engine outside grew louder. It was not a police siren. It was the aggressive idle of a large SUV. Then came the sound of car doors slamming. 1, 2, 3. I stood up and tossed the circuit board onto the seat. I grabbed my shotgun from the passenger side where I had laid it. The heavy steel roller door of the warehouse rattled. Someone was pounding on it. "Open up, Dad." It was Lucas. But his voice was not scared anymore. It was desperate and angry. "Open the door, Dad. We know you are in there. Tiffany is losing her patience, and she brought friends." I pumped the shotgun. The sound echoed through the empty warehouse like a thunderclap. I retreated into the shadows behind a stack of old engine blocks. I was trapped. I was outnumbered. And I was holding a bomb that was about to go off. But as I leveled the barrel toward the door, I felt a cold calm wash over me. They found the old man. But they were about to discover that this old man still had some high voltage left in him. I stayed in the shadows behind the stack of rusted engine blocks, my finger resting lightly on the trigger guard of the Remington. The pounding on the steel roller door echoed through the cavernous space like a war drum. It was a sound I knew well. It was the sound of desperation. I did not open the door immediately. I let him knock. I let him scream. I needed to gauge his state of mind. A panicked man makes mistakes, but a terrified man is dangerous. Lucas sounded terrified. "Dad, please open the door," he screamed, his voice cracking. "They are going to kill me. You have to let me in." I walked over to the wall switch and hit the button. The heavy industrial motor groaned, and the chain rattled as the steel door began to roll up. It moved agonizingly slow inches at a time. Before it was even 2 feet off the ground, Lucas scrambled underneath it, crawling on his hands and knees like a frightened animal. He ruined his $1,000 Italian suit, dragging himself over the dirty concrete floor. He stood up, gasping for air, his face slick with sweat, his eyes wild. He looked around the dim warehouse until his eyes locked onto the red truck. He let out a sob of relief and ran toward it, ignoring me completely. He grabbed the door handle, pulling at it frantically, but I had locked it. "Where are the keys?" he shouted, spinning around to face me. "Give me the keys, Dad. We have to get this truck out of here. We have to give it to them." I stepped into the light, the shotgun held loosely at my waist. I did not aim it at him. I did not have to. The sight of his 78-year-old father holding a riot weapon stopped him cold. "Lucas," I said, my voice low and steady. "Step away from the truck." He froze, his hands held up in a gesture of surrender. "Dad, listen to me. You do not understand what is happening. Put the gun down. We do not have time for this. Tell me what is happening, Lucas. Tell me why my truck is filled with contraband." He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. "It is money, Dad. I got into some bad debt. Gambling debt. I borrowed from the wrong people. Loan sharks. Vicious people. They told me if I did not help them move some product, they would break my legs. He took a step toward me, his hands shaking. It is just drugs, Dad. A few kilos of cocaine hidden in the panels. I know it is bad. I know I messed up. But if we give them the truck, they will let me go. Just give me the keys and I will drive it away. You will never see them again. I promise. I watched him lie. I watched the way his eyes shifted to the left, just like they did when he was 10 years old, and broke my favorite fishing rod. He was 45 years old now, but he was still that scared little boy trying to talk his way out of a punishment. But this was not a broken fishing rod. I shook my head slowly. I felt a deep, profound sadness washing over me. It is a terrible thing to realize your own child thinks you are stupid. Drugs, I repeated. Yes, drugs, Lucas said, nodding vigorously. Just drugs. They are criminals, Dad. They do not care about us. They just want their product. I reached into the deep pocket of my canvas work coat. My hand closed around the cold, sharp edges of the circuit board I had cut out of the door panel minutes ago. I pulled it out. The green fiberglass caught the overhead light, the gold contacts gleaming. I tossed it. It spun through the air and landed with a clatter at Lucas's feet. He looked down at it, and the color drained from his face completely, leaving him looking like a wax figure. Since when does cocaine come with a Department of Defense serial number, Lucas? He did not answer. He could not answer. The lie had shattered into a million pieces on the concrete floor. I took a step forward, the gravel crunching under my boots. That is a guidance chip for a surface-to-air missile system. That is not something you sell on a street corner. That is treason, Lucas. You are not working for loan sharks. You are working for terrorists or foreign intelligence. Lucas dropped to his knees. His legs just gave out. He covered his face with his hands and began to weep. It was a pathetic sound, a high-pitched keening that echoed off the metal walls. I waited. I let him cry. I wanted to feel sympathy. I wanted to go over there and put my hand on his shoulder and tell him we would fix this. But I couldn't. The soldier in me saw only a traitor. The father in me saw only a failure. I didn't mean for it to get this big, he sobbed through his fingers. It was just numbers at first. I was the CFO, Dad. I moved some money around. I thought I could put it back before the audit. But the market crashed. I lost everything. He looked up at me, his face streaked with tears and grime. I was going to go to jail for embezzlement. Decades, Dad. My life was over. Then Tiffany found out. Tiffany, I asked. Your wife. She knew people, Lucas whispered. She said she could fix it. She said she had contacts in logistics who could cover the hole in the accounts. All I had to do was help them move some sensitive electronics. She said it was just industrial prototypes. She lied to me too, Dad. She promised nobody would get hurt. I stared at him. So that was it. He was not the mastermind. He was the weak link. He stole money to buy things he did not need to impress people he did not like. And when the bill came due, he sold his country and his father to save his own skin. You coward, I said. The word tasted like ash in my mouth. You spineless coward. You let them use my truck. You let them track me. You put a target on my back because you were too scared to face the consequences of your own greed. Please, Dad, he begged, crawling toward me. You have to help me. If I don't give them the truck, they will kill me. They are not normal criminals. They are professionals. I looked at the shotgun in my hands. I looked at the circuit board on the floor. I looked at the man who shared my last name. I am not going to give them the truck, Lucas. I am going to call the FBI. And you are going to sit right there and tell them everything. No, Dad. No, please. Lucas lunged for my legs. I stepped back, raising the butt of the shotgun to strike him if I had to. But I never got the chance. A roar filled the warehouse. Before I tell you who was about to arrive, let me ask you this. Who do you think it was, the police, or the person who had been pulling the strings all along? Leave your guess in the comments. I want to see who truly understands where this story is heading. And just so you know, some moments in what comes next are dramatized for storytelling purposes and may not be entirely factual. If you'd rather not continue, this is a good place to stop watching. A sound so loud it vibrated in my chest. Headlights blinded me. A black SUV tore through the open warehouse door, the engine screaming at the red line. It drifted sideways, tires smoking, and screeched to a halt between me and Lucas. I raised the shotgun, shielding my eyes from the high beams. The doors of the SUV flew open. I expected men in masks. I expected muscle. But the driver's side door opened, and a pair of red-bottomed high heels stepped onto the dirty concrete. Tiffany stepped out. She was wearing a trench coat belted tight at the waist. Her hair was perfect. Her makeup was flawless. She looked like she was on her way to a board meeting or a charity gala. Except for the object in her right hand. It was a pistol, sleek black and fitted with a long cylindrical suppressor. She did not look at me. She looked at her husband groveling on the floor. "Get up," she said. Her voice was ice. It was the same voice I had heard on the phone. The voice changer was gone, but the coldness was natural. Tiffany Lucas stammered, trying to stand up. I tried. He found the chips. He knows. Tiffany turned her head slowly and looked at me. She did not look afraid of the shotgun. She looked annoyed. She looked at me like I was a stain on her expensive carpet. "Hello, Jerry," she said. "You really are a stubborn old mule, aren't you?" I aimed the shotgun at her center mass. "Put the gun down, Tiffany. This ends now." She laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. "Oh, Jerry, this is just beginning. You think because you have a bird-hunting gun you are in charge. You have no idea what you have stepped into." She raised the pistol casually, leveling it at my head. "Drop the shotgun, Jerry, or I will put a bullet in your son's kneecap right now. And then I will do the other one. And then I will start on his fingers." I hesitated. I looked at Lucas. He was trembling, looking back and forth between his wife and his father. "Do it," she snapped. I lowered the shotgun. I could not watch my son be tortured no matter what he had done. "Good," she said. "Now kick it over here." I slid the shotgun across the floor. It spun and came to a rest near her feet. She looked at Lucas, her lip curling in disgust. "You are useless," she spat. "I told you to handle the old man. I told you to make it look like an accident. But you cannot do anything right, can you?" She walked over to him and kicked him hard in the ribs. Lucas yelped and curled into a ball. "Stop it!" I shouted, taking a step forward. She swung the gun back to me. "Stay where you are, old man. You want to be a hero. Fine. You can watch." She walked over to the truck. She ran her hand along the door panel, seeing the torn vinyl where I had ripped it open. She saw the circuit board on the floor. "You opened the package," she said, sighing. "That is unfortunate. The buyers wanted mint condition. Now we have to offer a discount. And that comes out of your share, Lucas." She turned back to me. "Open the gate, Jerry. We are taking the truck, and you are coming with us." "Where are we going?" I asked, playing for time. "We are going to a quiet place," she said, smiling a smile that did not reach her eyes. "A place where we can dispose of loose ends." "Because that is all you are now, Jerry. A loose end." She gestured with the gun toward the passenger seat of the SUV. "Get in. And if you try anything heroic, remember, I don't need Lucas alive to get paid. I just need the truck. He is expendable, and so are you." I looked at Lucas. He was looking at me, his his eyes begging for salvation. I looked at the truck, my beautiful red Ford that had been turned into a coffin. I walked toward the SUV. My mind was racing. They had the guns. They had the leverage. But they made one mistake. They were bringing an electrician to a place where they planned to kill him. And they forgot that I know how to make sparks fly in the dark. I sat in the passenger seat of the SUV for a moment before Tiffany changed her mind. She realized that dragging me to a second location was a logistical error. Why move the body when the grave was already dug? She ordered me back out onto the concrete floor of the warehouse. Her men, 3 of them, who had emerged from the back of the vehicle, stood around us in a loose semicircle. They were big, quiet, and moved with the efficiency of private military contractors. Tiffany walked over to where Lucas was still kneeling. She did not help him up. She stepped over him like he was a puddle of water. She looked at me, and for the first time I saw the real woman behind the mask. The mask of the doting daughter-in-law, the suburban housewife, the charity organizer, it all fell away. What was left was something sharp, cold, and entirely mechanical. "You really do not get it, do you, Jerry?" she said, checking the safety on her pistol. "You think this is about Lucas. You think this is about gambling debts and bad decisions." She laughed, and the sound echoed off the metal rafters. "Lucas is a rounding error. He is a useful idiot. I needed someone with a clean background to sign the shipping manifests, and your son was perfect because he is desperate to be important. But he is weak. He breaks under pressure, just like he is doing right now." She gestured to Lucas, who was staring at the floor, sobbing quietly. "I am not a gambler, Jerry. I am a logistics coordinator for one of the largest supply chain firms in the Midwest. I move things. That is what I do. Sometimes I move car parts. Sometimes I move medical supplies. And sometimes, when the price is right, I move proprietary guidance systems for clients who prefer to remain anonymous." I stared at her. The banality of evil. She wasn't a monster, she was just a manager. She treated treason like it was just another line item on a spreadsheet. "So I am just a shipping container to you," I said. "You are less than that," she replied. "You are an obstacle. You are a relic, Jerry. You and your entire generation. You sit on your pensions and your paid-off houses and you talk about honor and hard work while the world moves past you. You are debris in the road of progress. You think you are a hero because you fixed power lines for 40 years. You are nothing. You are a dinosaur who forgot to go extinct." She took a step closer, the suppressor of her pistol pointing at my chest. "And the worst part is, you are stubborn. If you had just driven the truck like a good little mule, none of this would be happening. You would be watching TV in your recliner and I would be rich. But no, you had to be a detective. You had to have principles." I stood tall. My back was stiff, my knees were aching, but I looked her dead in the eye. "I have principles because I have a soul, Tiffany. Something you sold a long time ago." Her eyes narrowed. She didn't like that. I struck a nerve. The corporate facade cracked for a millisecond, and I saw the rage underneath. "You want to talk about souls," she hissed. "Let us see how much your soul weighs when it is dead weight." She raised the gun. She didn't aim for my head. She aimed for my shoulder. There was a sound like a heavy book being slammed flat on a table. "Foot." I felt the impact before I heard the noise. It felt like someone had swung a red-hot hammer into my left deltoid. The force spun me around, and I stumbled, dropping to one knee. My vision blurred white for a second. The smell of ozone and burnt fabric filled my nose. Dad Lucas screamed, trying to scramble toward me, but one of the guards kicked him back down. I gritted my teeth, forcing the scream back down my throat. I breathed in through my nose, out through my mouth. I checked the sensation. My arm was numb, but I could still move my fingers. She had missed the bone. It was a flesh wound, but it was bleeding freely, soaking my canvas coat. "That was a warning," she said, standing over me. "The next one goes in your gut. And that takes days to kill you." She turned to the largest of the 3 men. "Tie him up. Use the support pillar over there. And make it tight." I do not want him interfering while we work." The man grabbed me by my collar and dragged me across the floor. He shoved me against a rusted steel I-beam that held up the roof. He pulled my hands behind the pillar. He used heavy-duty plastic zip ties. I heard the zip sound as he cinched them down. He pulled them so tight they cut into my wrists, stopping the circulation. He patted me down, taking my pocket knife and my phone. He tossed them to Tiffany. Now she said, clapping her hands together like she was organizing a team-building exercise, "Let us get this done. We are behind schedule." She pointed to my truck. "Strip the door panels. Pull the cargo. Check every serial number against the manifest. I want the merchandise secured in the SUV in 10 minutes. "And what about them?" one of the men asked, jerking his head toward me and Lucas. Tiffany looked at me and smiled. A cruel, terrifying smile. "We are going to stage a tragedy. It is really quite sad." An elderly man suffering from early-onset dementia got confused. He was driving his old truck in an abandoned industrial area. He must have been drinking. He crashed into a support beam. The fuel line ruptured. The truck caught fire. She walked over and patted the hood of my Ford F-100. Fire solves everything. It destroys the truck. It destroys the biological evidence. And it destroys the body. As for Lucas, well, grief is a terrible thing. Maybe he tried to save his father and perished in the flames too. Lucas looked up, his face pale as a ghost. "You are going to kill me." "You are a liability, darling," she said casually. "You know too much, and you are too weak to keep your mouth shut. It is a business decision, nothing personal." She turned her back on us. "Get to work." The men descended on the truck. They had power tools. I heard the screech of a drill and the cracking of plastic as they began to tear into the passenger side door. They were efficient. They were fast. They were dismantling my life's work to get at the poison hidden inside. I slumped against the pillar, letting my head hang low. To them, I looked like a defeated old man, bleeding and dying. I let my breathing become shallow and ragged. I wanted them to ignore me. I wanted to become part of the background furniture. But my mind was razor sharp. The pain in my shoulder was a focusing lens. It cleared away the fear. It cleared away the hesitation. I focused on my hands behind the pillar. The zip ties were thick industrial-grade nylon. I could not break them. I could not chew through them. But I had one advantage. I had hands that had worked with high-tension wires and heavy machinery for 4 decades. My grip strength was iron, and I knew something about anatomy that I learned in boot camp 50 years ago. The human thumb is just a joint, a ball and socket held together by ligaments. If you are willing to accept a certain amount of agony, you can dislocate it. You can fold it into your palm, making your hand narrow enough to slip through a cuff. I closed my eyes. I concentrated on my right hand. I tucked my thumb into my palm. I began to squeeze. I pushed. The pain was blinding. It felt like I was crushing my own hand in a vice. Sweat poured down my face, mixing with the grime. I bit my lip so hard I tasted copper. I heard the men laughing as they ripped the upholstery out of my truck. I heard Tiffany on the phone confirming the delivery coordinates. They did not look at the old man in the corner. I pushed harder. There was a sickening wet pop inside my hand. A jolt of nausea hit me, but I swallowed it down. My thumb was out of the socket. It was hanging limp against my palm. My hand was now narrow enough. I began to pull. The zip tie scraped the skin off my wrist. It burned like fire. But slowly, millimeter by millimeter, my right hand began to slide free. I watched them destroy my truck. I watched the woman who planned to burn me alive check her watch. They thought they were on a schedule. They thought they had 10 minutes. They were wrong. My hand slipped out of the plastic loop. It was free. It was throbbing and useless for gripping, but it was free. I slowly, quietly reached down to my belt with my left hand. They had taken my pocket knife. They had taken my phone. but they didn't check my ankle. I always carry a backup, a small electrician's insulation knife tucked into my boot. I gripped the handle. Tiffany was right about one thing. Fire does solve everything. But she was about to learn that you should never start a fire in a room with a man who knows how to control the spark. The pain in my right hand was a living, breathing thing. It pulsed in time with my heartbeat, a dull roar that threatened to drown out my thoughts. But I pushed it down. I wrapped the pain in a mental box and shoved it to the back of my mind, just like I had done when I fell off a utility pole in '82 and finished the shift with a broken rib. I was free. The zip tie lay on the ground behind the pillar, a useless piece of plastic sliced clean through by the insulation knife I had pulled from my boot. I did not move immediately. I stayed crouched in the darkness behind the steel column, my chest heaving silently. I watched them. Tiffany was standing by the hood of the SUV, tapping on her phone. She looked bored. To her, this was just a transaction, a logistics problem to be solved. Her men were tearing my truck apart like a pack of wolves on a carcass. I heard the screech of metal as they pried the dashboard open. I heard Lucas whimpering in the background, a pathetic sound that made my stomach turn. They were distracted. Arrogance is a powerful blinder. They thought I was a crippled old man tied to a post. They thought they had won. I looked at my surroundings. This warehouse was my cathedral. I knew every bolt, every weld, and every wire. I had wired this place myself 30 years ago when the union was strong and the machines were running 24/7. I looked toward the far wall about 50 feet away. There it was, the main breaker panel, a gray steel monolith mounted on the brick wall. It controlled the power for the entire facility. 480 volts of three-phase industrial current. Enough juice to run a stamping press or stop a human heart in a millisecond. I knew that panel. I knew it had a flaw, or rather a feature that I could exploit. I began to move. I stayed low, crawling on my stomach through the oil and grime. I moved like a snake, using my elbows and knees, dragging my injured body across the cold concrete. I kept to the shadows, weaving behind stacks of pallets and rusted machinery. Every few feet I stopped and listened. "Hey, watch the paint," one of the men shouted as a piece of trim flew off the truck. "Just get the product," Tiffany snapped without looking up. "We have 5 minutes before we move." 5 minutes. I had less than that. I reached the wall. The breaker panel loomed above me. It was locked, of course. A standard safety padlock. But I am a master electrician. I have a ring of skeleton keys that I have carried since 1970. I reached into my pocket with my good hand and pulled out the brass ring. I fumbled for the small jagged key that fits a square D industrial enclosure. My heart was hammering against my ribs. If they looked over now, if just one of them turned their head, I was dead. I slid the key in. It turned with a satisfying click. I opened the heavy steel door. Inside was a beautiful, deadly maze of copper and rubber. The main bus bars were thick as my thumb, glowing with potential energy. The smell of ozone and old dust wafted out. It was the smell of power. I looked at the layout. I needed a distraction. No, I needed more than a distraction. I needed chaos. I could just pull the main shutoff lever. That would kill the lights. But they had flashlights. They had the headlights of the SUV. Darkness was not enough. I needed a weapon. I looked at the bottom of the panel. There was an old mechanical timer switch. Back in the day, it controlled the heavy ventilation fans that sucked the welding fumes out of the air. It was a spring wound dial, simple and robust. I had an idea that would have gotten me fired and arrested back when I was working. But tonight, it was my only hope. I took my insulation knife. I stripped the insulation off a heavy gauge jumper wire I found lying in the bottom of the cabinet. I was going to create a dead short. I was going to connect Phase A directly to Phase B bypassing the breakers, but I was going to route it through the timer. It was suicide work. Working on a live 480-volt panel with one good hand and no safety gear is insanity. One slip and I would be vaporized. I worked fast. My hands moved with a memory of their own. I loosened the lug on the timer. I jammed the copper wire in. I connected the other end to the main bus bar. I was building a bomb. Not with explosives, but with electrons. When that timer hit 0, it would close the circuit. The massive inrush of current would have nowhere to go. The copper would vaporize, instantly expanding to 20,000 times its volume. It is called an arc flash. It is like a grenade made of lightning. I set the dial. 3 minutes. Tick, tick, tick. The mechanism started to purr softly. I closed the panel door, but left it unlatched. Now I needed to clear the blast zone. And I needed to make sure they were looking the wrong way when the world ended. I crawled away from the panel, moving toward the back of the warehouse near the old air compressor room. The air compressor was a massive beast of a machine, rusted and leaking. The floor around it was covered in a slick mixture of oil and condensed water. It was a slip hazard, a death trap. I picked up a heavy steel bolt from the floor. I weighed it in my hand. I looked at the group by the truck. One of the guards, the biggest one, the one who had tied me up, was standing guard near the rear of the SUV. He was holding an assault rifle, scanning the room lazily. I needed him to move. I threw the bolt. It sailed through the darkness and hit the metal tank of the air compressor with a loud, sharp clang. The sound cut through the noise of the power tools like a gunshot. Everything stopped. "What was that?" Tiffany asked, looking up sharply. "It came from the back," the big guard said, raising his rifle. "Rats, maybe?" "Go check it," Tiffany ordered. "I do not like surprises." The guard grunted and started walking toward me. He was walking right into my trap. I pressed myself flat against the floor behind the compressor. I could hear his heavy boots crunching on the gravel. I could see the beam of his tactical flashlight sweeping the darkness. He was getting closer. He stepped onto the wet, oily concrete near the compressor. I held my breath. He stopped about 10 feet from me. He swept his light over the machinery. "Nothing here," he called out, turning his head back toward the truck. "Just old junk." "Check behind the tank," Tiffany yelled back. The guard sighed. He took another step. That was when I made my move. I did not attack him. I am 78 years old, with a dislocated thumb and a bullet graze on my shoulder. I cannot fight a 200-pound mercenary. But I know physics. I reached out with my leg and kicked a piece of metal pipe that was propping up a heavy shelf full of old spare parts. The shelf groaned. It tipped. The guard spun around, bringing his rifle up. The shelf crashed down. It did not hit him, but it scattered hundreds of ball bearings across the oily floor. The guard tried to step back. His boot hit the oil-covered ball bearings. It was like stepping on ice. His feet went out from under him. He went down hard, his rifle clattering away across the floor. His head hit the concrete with a sickening thud. He didn't move. "Hey!" Tiffany screamed. "What is going on back there?" The other 2 men at the truck stopped working. They grabbed their weapons. "Check it!" she screamed. They started running toward me. I looked at the timer on the wall across the room. The dial was almost at 0. I scrambled to my feet. I ignored the pain. I ran toward the rear exit door. "Hey, he is loose!" one of the men shouted, pointing his flashlight at me. I saw the muzzle flash. A bullet sparked off the concrete near my foot. I dove through the doorway into the loading dock, just as the timer hit the mark. K-boom. It was not a sound. It was a physical force. The breaker panel exploded. A ball of blue-white plasma, the temperature of the sun, erupted from the wall. It was blinding. It was brighter than a lightning strike in a dark room. The concussion wave hit me, knocking me flat onto the loading dock platform outside. Inside the warehouse, hell broke loose. The main bus bars vaporized. The explosion blew the heavy steel cover of the panel off its hinges, sending it flying across the room like a frisbee. Every light bulb in the warehouse surged and shattered instantly, raining hot glass down on the men. The electrical system overloaded so violently that the transformers on the pole outside the building blew up in a shower of sparks. The warehouse went pitch black. Silence followed the boom. Then came the screaming. My eyes were seeing spots. My ears were ringing. But I was alive. I scrambled up. I was in the cool night air. The smell of ozone was overpowering, mixed with the smoke from the blown transformers. I did not look back. I knew what an arc flash does. It blinds you. It disorients you. For the next few minutes, those men inside would be stumbling around in the dark, seeing nothing but purple spots, rubbing their eyes, wondering if they were dead. I had bought myself time. Not much, but enough. I ran into the woods behind the warehouse, moving as fast as my old legs would carry me. I disappeared into the tree line just as I heard Tiffany's voice shrieking in rage from inside the blackened, smoking building. I was gone. I was a ghost in the machine. And now the hunt was truly on. I ran until the taste of copper filled my throat. The woods behind the warehouse were thick, tangled with underbrush and old chain-link fences that tore at my clothes, but I did not slow down. The darkness was my friend now. Behind me, the orange glow of the electrical fire faded, but the shouting did not. They were disorganized, blinded, and angry, but they would regroup quickly. Tiffany was not the type of woman to let a loose end run free, especially when that loose end was the only witness to her crimes. My left shoulder throbbed with a rhythm that matched my heartbeat. The bullet graze was burning like a hot iron pressed against my skin. My right hand, the one with the dislocated thumb, hung uselessly at my side, swelling inside my coat pocket. But pain is just information. That is what they taught us in basic training 50 years ago. Pain tells you you are still alive. It tells you that the machine is damaged but still functioning. I circled back toward my property, but I did not go to the house. The house was compromised. They would expect me to go there to get my medicine or my car. They would be waiting. Instead, I headed for the tree line at the far south edge of my acre. There was a small storm cellar there, a concrete box buried in the earth that I had reinforced back in '99 when everyone thought the computers were going to stop working. It was overgrown with kudzu and looked like nothing more than a mound of dirt, but inside it was dry and secure. I pulled the heavy steel hatch open with my good hand, gritting my teeth as the effort sent a spike of agony through my shoulder. I slipped inside and locked the deadbolt behind me. The air smelled of damp earth and stale concrete. I fumbled in the dark until my fingers found the battery-powered lantern I kept on the shelf. I clicked it on. The harsh white light flooded the small space, revealing shelves of canned food, a cot, and a metal workbench. I stripped off my heavy canvas coat. It was soaked with blood on the left side. I peeled back my shirt. The wound was ugly, a deep furrow where the bullet had plowed through the muscle, but it had missed the artery and the bone. I grabbed a bottle of rubbing alcohol and a clean rag. I bit down on a piece of leather strap I kept on the bench and poured the alcohol. The scream stayed inside my chest, but tears leaked from my eyes. It felt like liquid fire. I wrapped the wound tight with gauze, taping it down. Then I looked at my right hand. The thumb was swollen purple, looking like a sausage. I could not pop it back in myself, not with one good hand. I taped it to my index finger, immobilizing it. It would have to do. I sat down on the cot, my chest heaving. I was patched up. I was safe for the moment. But I was not done. I looked at the workbench. Tucked in the corner under a layer of dust was a small framed photograph. I picked it up. It was Lucas. He was 7 years old, wearing a baseball cap that was too big for him, holding up a small bluegill fish he had caught in the lake. He was smiling that gap-toothed smile that used to light up my whole world. I remembered that day. I remembered how he was afraid to touch the worm, and I had to help him. I remembered how he looked at me like I was Superman, because I could fix his tangled fishing line. I stared at the photo for a long time. The silence in the bunker was heavy. I looked for that boy in my memory. I looked for the innocence. But all I could see was the man kneeling on the warehouse floor, weeping while his wife threatened to kill his father. All I could see was the coward who sold his country for a gambling debt. I took a deep breath and I let it out slowly. In that cold underground room, something inside me broke. It was the last thread of hope, the last instinct of a father trying to protect his cub. That boy in the picture was dead. He died a long time ago. The man out there was a stranger who had tried to bury me. I placed the photo face down on the table. I did not throw it away. I just turned it over. I could not look at it anymore. Now there was only the mission. I reached into a metal box under the cot and pulled out an old burner phone. It was an emergency line I kept charged. I dialed a number I had not called in 10 years. It rang 4 times. "Yeah," a gruff voice answered. "It is Jerry," I said. There was a pause. "Jerry Kowalski. I thought you were dead or in a nursing home." "Not yet, Frank. Listen to me. I do not have much time. I need you to call the bureau." Frank was a retired field agent. We fished together in the 90s. He knew I didn't make prank calls. I told him everything. I gave him the names. Tiffany, the logistics company, the missile chips, the warehouse location. I kept it short and brutal. "Jesus," Jerry Frank breathed. "If this is real, you need to get out of there. I will call it in, but the local field office is understaffed at night. It will take them an hour to mobilize a SWAT team and get a warrant. You know how the bureaucracy works." "I know," I said. "That is why I am telling you. Send them to the warehouse, but tell them the birds have flown." "Where are you going, Jerry?" "Don't play hero. I am not playing hero, Frank. I am taking out the trash." I hung up before he could argue. I broke the SIM card and tossed it into the corner. An hour. I had an hour before the cavalry arrived. But Tiffany would be gone in 20 minutes. She would realize the warehouse was burned. She would pack whatever she could salvage and disappear. She would kill Lucas to tie up the loose end and vanish into the corporate ether. I could not let that happen. I needed to stop her. I needed to hold her in one place until the sirens came. But I was one old man with a shotgun and a bad arm. I couldn't fight her security team head on. Not in a fair fight. So I wouldn't fight fair. I needed a kill box. A place where I controlled the environment. A place where high-tech weapons and expensive SUVs didn't matter. I thought about the tracker I mailed to Canada. I thought about the decoy. I needed another decoy. I stood up and grabbed a fresh box of shotgun shells from the shelf. I shoved them into my pocket. I thought about my friend Al. Al ran a scrapyard about 5 miles from here. It was called Old Rusty. It was a maze of crushed cars, mountains of steel and heavy machinery. Al was in Florida for the winter. The gates were locked, but I had the combination. Old Rusty. It was perfect. It was a graveyard of metal. A place where things went to be crushed and forgotten. I checked my watch. My adrenaline was fading and fatigue was setting in, but I pushed it away. I needed to lure them there. I needed to offer them something they wanted more than my death. Greed. Greed was the hook. I still had the burner phone. I hadn't destroyed the phone itself, just the SIM card, but I had another card taped under the battery for emergencies. I swapped it in. I knew Tiffany's number. It was in my call history on my main phone before she took it. I hoped I remembered it right. I typed out a text message. My thumb throbbed with every keystroke, but I didn't stop. I needed to sound beaten. I needed to sound like I was trying to make a deal. I wrote, "You win." The chips in the warehouse were fakes. I swapped them out before I went inside. The real guidance systems are hidden in a safe location. I don't want to die. I want to trade. I paused. Was it believable? Yes. She knew I was a meticulous man. She would believe I was smart enough to swap the cargo, and she would believe that an old man facing death would crumble and try to negotiate. I continued typing, "Meet me at Old Rusty Scrapyard on County Road 9. Come alone or with Lucas. If I see cops, I burn the chips. If you kill me, you never find them. You have 30 minutes. I hit send. I stared at the screen, waiting for the delivery confirmation. Delivered. Now the clock was ticking for real. I gathered my gear. I grabbed a flare gun from the emergency kit. I grabbed a roll of heavy copper wire. I grabbed a pair of bolt cutters. I unlocked the bunker door and stepped back out into the night. The air was cold, but I was sweating. I walked toward the back of my property where my old ATV was parked under a tarp. It would be a rough ride to the scrapyard through the back trails, but I couldn't take the roads. I climbed onto the ATV and started the engine. It coughed and sputtered, then roared to life. I looked back at my house one last time. It was dark and silent. The life I had built there was over. The man who lived there was gone. I revved the engine and tore off into the woods, heading for the graveyard of cars. I was not the prey anymore. I was the hunter. And tonight, the wolves were walking into the lion's den. The ride to the scrapyard was a blur of mud and freezing rain. My ATV tore through the overgrown trails behind my property, the engine roaring like an angry beast in the quiet night. Every bump sent a fresh jolt of agony through my injured shoulder, but I clamped my jaw shut and kept the throttle pinned. There is a specific kind of clarity that comes when you have lost everything. The fear vanishes. The hesitation evaporates. All that is left is the mission. And my mission was sitting 5 miles away in a graveyard of rusted steel. Old Rusty is not just a scrapyard. To the untrained eye, it looks like chaos. Piles of crushed sedans stacked 3 stories high, mountains of twisted rebar, and old washing machines rusting into the earth. But to me and my friend Al, it was an organized inventory of American history. I knew every aisle. I knew every blind spot. And most importantly, I knew about the magnetic crane that towered over the center of the yard like a prehistoric predator. I killed the engine of the ATV a quarter mile from the main gate. I pushed it deep into a thicket of briars and covered it with dead branches. Silence was my armor now. I moved on foot through the perimeter fence, finding the hole in the chain link that Al had cut years ago for his stray cats. The rain was coming down in sheets now. A cold, relentless downpour that turned the dirt into slick mud. It soaked through my bandage, stinging the bullet wound on my shoulder, but I welcomed it. The rain would mask my scent. It would muffle the sound of my boots on the gravel. And it would make the steel plate in the center of the yard slippery and treacherous. I made my way to the base of the crane. It was a massive Liebherr material handler, a beast of a machine, capable of lifting 10 tons of scrap metal without breaking a sweat. The cab sat 40 feet in the air, a glass box perched on top of a yellow steel tower. The climb was a nightmare. Under normal circumstances, climbing a vertical steel ladder in the rain is dangerous. Doing it with a dislocated thumb and a hole in your shoulder is suicide. I grabbed the first rung with my good hand and pulled. My body screamed, my muscles seized, but I forced my legs to drive me upward. 1 rung, 2 rungs. I slipped on the 5th rung, my boot skidding on the wet metal. I swung out over the void, hanging by one arm, my breath hitching in my throat. I swung back, slamming my chest against the ladder. I did not stop. I could not stop. When I finally reached the catwalk outside the cab, I was gasping for air, my vision swimming with black spots. I opened the door and collapsed into the operator's seat. The smell of stale cigars and hydraulic fluid hit me. It was the smell of hard work, the smell of safety. I did not turn on the interior lights. I did not turn on the exterior floodlights. I kept the beast dark. I reached for the control panel. My hand shook as I flipped the master power switch. The dashboard came alive with a dim green glow. Gauges flickered. The diesel generator deep in the belly of the machine rumbled to life. It was a low-frequency hum that was easily masked by the sound of the thunder rolling overhead. I engaged the camera system. Al had installed a thermal imaging camera for working at night. I watched the screen flicker to life. The yard was a landscape of cool blues and purples. The rain cooled everything down, except for the heat signatures approaching the gate. 2 minutes later they arrived. I saw them on the screen before I heard them. 2 large SUVs tearing down the county road, moving fast. They did not stop at the locked gate. The lead vehicle, a massive armored truck, smashed through the chain-link fence, tearing it from its posts like it was made of paper. Tiffany was not in a mood for manners. The vehicles skidded to a halt in the main clearing. The headlights cut through the driving rain, illuminating the centerpiece of my trap. Sitting there in the middle of the mud was my truck, or at least what looked like my truck. It was actually a shell, a rusted-out 1972 Ford body that Al had stripped for parts years ago. I had dragged it into position with the ATV before I climbed up. It sat directly on top of the weigh scale. The weigh scale at Old Rusty is not a normal scale. It is a solid plate of conductive steel 20 feet by 20 feet set flush into the ground. It was designed to weigh semi-trucks loaded with scrap. Tonight, it was going to weigh sins. The doors of the SUVs flew open. Tiffany stepped out first. Even in the thermal camera, I could see the heat radiating from her. She was furious. She stomped into the mud, her expensive trench coat flapping in the wind. She walked around to the back of the second vehicle and dragged someone out. Lucas. He hit the ground hard. He did not try to stand up. He just lay there in the mud, curled into a fetal ball. Tiffany kicked him. I saw the heat bloom on his ribs where her boot connected. "Get up," she screamed. Her voice carried over the sound of the rain, faint but distinct. "Get up and find the cargo." 5 men spilled out of the vehicles. They were heavily armed. Assault rifles, tactical vests, night vision goggles. They looked like a special forces team invading a hostile country. They fanned out, their weapons raised, scanning the piles of junk. They were looking for a sniper. They were looking for an ambush from the ground. They never looked up. People rarely look up. It is a biological blind spot. Tiffany marched toward the truck. She was holding a flashlight in one hand and her pistol in the other. She reached the decoy truck and yanked the door open. She froze. Even from 40 feet in the air, I knew what she was seeing. The truck was empty. No seats, no dashboard, no door panels. Just a hollow, rusted shell housing a family of raccoons. She spun around, screaming into the night. "Jerry, come out, you old bastard. I know you are here." I sat in the dark cabin, my hand hovering over the joystick. I did not answer. I watched her spin in circles, her flashlight beam cutting erratic arcs through the rain. She grabbed Lucas by the collar and hauled him to his feet. She shoved him toward the truck. "Call him," she shrieked. "Call your father. Tell him I will put a bullet in your head right now if he does not show himself." Lucas was sobbing. I could see his shoulders shaking. "Dad, please. Dad, she means it." I watched my son. I watched the man who had sold me out, and I felt nothing. No anger, no pity, just a cold calculation of the physics involved. One of the mercenaries shouted something. He was pointing at a pile of scrap near the back of the weigh scale. I had hidden the real cargo there inside a waterproof toolbox taken from a boat. I left it partially exposed, just enough to be found. Tiffany ran over to it. She kicked the box open. She reached inside and pulled out a vacuum-sealed bag. She ripped it open. She held a circuit board up to the headlights of the SUV. It was real. This time it was the real guidance chip. I had kept one, just one, to make the bait taste authentic. "We got it," she yelled. "Load it up. All of it. The men converged, all 5 of them, plus Tiffany, plus Lucas. They gathered around the toolbox. They were celebrating. They were high-fiving. They thought they had won. They thought the old man had simply dumped the goods and run away in terror. They were standing directly in the center of the steel plate. They were standing on the kill zone. I looked at the control panel. The magnet was powered down, but the capacitors were charged. The electromagnet on this crane was designed to lift 10 tons of jagged steel. It was a circular disc, 5 feet across, hanging from a thick cable directly above their heads. In the darkness and the rain, they hadn't even noticed it. It hung there like a dark moon invisible against the black sky. I moved the joystick 1 inch to the left. The crane arm groaned softly, shifting in the wind. Tiffany looked up. She paused. She sensed something. "Wait," she said. Silence. The men went quiet. "What is that noise?" she asked. "It is the generator," one of the men said. "Probably just the facility power kicking on." "No," she said. Her voice was trembling now. "It is coming from above us." She raised her flashlight. The beam cut through the rain, climbing higher and higher into the night. It swept past the piles of cars. It swept past the skeletal arm of the crane. And then the light hit the glass of my cabin. For a split second, we made eye contact. Me sitting in the dark like a gargoyle. Her standing in the mud clutching a stolen missile chip. She saw me, and in that moment, she understood the geometry of her mistake. She looked down at her feet. She looked at the steel plate she was standing on. She looked at the massive magnet hanging 20 feet above her head. "Run!" she screamed, but it was too late. Physics is a harsh mistress. It does not negotiate. It does not hesitate. I slammed my good hand down on the red button marked Magnet Engage. The capacitors discharged. A massive surge of electricity flooded into the copper coils of the magnet. The sound was not a boom. It was a thrum, a deep resonant vibration that shook the fillings in my teeth. The steel plate they were standing on was not bolted down. It was a floating scale, and when the magnet engaged, it became a projectile. The force of the magnetic field was instantaneous. The guns in their hands ripped upwards. The rifles flew out of their grips like they were made of feathers, slapping against the face of the magnet with a deafening clang. But that was just the appetizer. The steel plate beneath their feet groaned. The SUV closest to the plate slid sideways, its tires screeching as the engine block was dragged toward the magnetic center. Tiffany screamed as the pistol was ripped from her hand, breaking her trigger finger. They were trapped, not by bars, but by the invisible hand of electromagnetism. The metal on their bodies, belt buckles, steel toe boots, zippers, tactical vests, weapons, all of it was being pulled upward with thousands of pounds of force, while the steel plate below them was vibrating, trying to lift off the ground. They were caught in a magnetic sandwich. I watched on the thermal screen as they scrambled, falling over each other, trying to crawl off the plate. But the magnetic field was disorienting. It messed with their equilibrium, and the flying debris made it a war zone. I leaned forward to the microphone that was connected to the yard's PA system. I flipped the switch. My voice boomed out over the loudspeakers, distorted and godlike, echoing through the rain. "Welcome to Old Rusty," I said. "Please keep your hands and feet inside the ride at all times." I pushed the joystick forward. The crane arm began to lift, and with it, the magnet. And with the magnet, the chaos below. I was not done yet. I had them pinned. Now it was time to put them away. The crane arm groaned as it lifted higher into the stormy sky. I sat in the glass cabin 40 feet above the ground, looking down at the ants in the mud. They were scrambling. The magnetic field I had activated was humming with a low-frequency vibration that rattled the fillings in my teeth even from this distance. Down below, Tiffany was still trying to salvage her operation. She did not realize yet that the physics of the situation had already sealed her fate. She was screaming at her men to load the cargo into the armored truck. She was clinging to the belief that if she just moved fast enough, she could outrun the consequences. She grabbed the waterproof toolbox I had left as bait. She dumped the rest of the vacuum-sealed bags onto the wet ground. She needed to verify the merchandise. She needed to know that her millions were safe. I watched on the thermal monitor as she ripped open the second bag, then the third, then the fourth. I saw her body language change. She froze. She fell to her knees in the mud. She held up one of the green circuit boards to the headlights of the SUV. In the harsh glare, she saw what I had done. 3 hours ago, while sitting in my bunker, I had taken a cordless drill to every single one of those boards. I had drilled a 1/4-inch hole right through the central processing unit of each chip. I destroyed the logic gates. I destroyed the memory cores. I turned $12 million of military-grade guidance technology into worthless fiberglass and scrap silicon. I saw her mouth open in a scream that was swallowed by the thunder. She was not screaming in fear. She was screaming in pure, unadulterated rage. She threw the ruined board at the windshield of her truck, shattering the glass. She looked up at my cabin. She could not see me through the rain and the glare, but she knew I was there. "You old fool," she shrieked, her voice faint and distorted by the wind. "You burned it all. You burned everything." She was wrong. I did not burn it. I neutralized it. I took the weapon out of the enemy hand, but she was not done. She reached for her belt for another magazine for her pistol. Her men were raising their rifles, trying to find an angle to shoot the operator of the crane. It was time to end the lesson. I put my hand on the control lever for the electromagnet voltage. I had only engaged it at 30% power before, just enough to pin them and disarm them of their primary weapons. Now I was going to turn it up to 100%. I pushed the lever all the way forward. The hum of the machine turned into a roar. The air around the crane seemed to warp. The rain falling through the magnetic field hissed as it hit the energized plate. The effect was instantaneous and violent. The first thing to go was the rest of their arsenal. The men who had managed to hold on to their sidearms felt the weapons ripped from their holsters. The guns flew upward, hitting the underside of the magnet face with a deafening clang. Tactical knives, zippers, belt buckles, anything ferrous became a prisoner of the field. But the real terror came from the vehicles. The 2 SUVs were parked on the edge of the steel weigh plate. They weighed 3 tons each. But against an industrial electromagnet designed to lift solid steel ingots, they were lightweight toys. The magnetic force grabbed the engine blocks of the vehicles. The tires shrieked across the wet metal plate. The SUVs slid sideways, crashing into each other. They formed a V-shape, trapping Tiffany and her mercenaries in the center. Then the loose scrap metal from the surrounding piles joined the party. Old Rusty was a messy yard. There were rusted car doors, lengths of iron pipe, and sheets of corrugated steel lying everywhere. The magnet sucked them in. Metal flew through the air like leaves in a hurricane. A car hood slammed into the side of the SUVs, blocking their escape route to the left. A twisted bundle of rebar crashed down on the right. In less than 10 seconds, I had built a prison. The SUVs and the flying scrap metal had formed a jagged, impregnable cage around the group. They were pinned in the center, huddled together for safety, as jagged pieces of iron circled them like sharks. I watched them cower. The mercenaries who looked so tough 10 minutes ago were now huddled on the ground, covering their heads with their hands. Tiffany was pressed against the tire of her truck, her expensive trench coat covered in mud and oil, and Lucas, my son. He was sitting in the middle of it all, staring up at the magnet with wide, terrified eyes. I reached for the microphone of the public address system. The old speaker horn was mounted right below the cab. It was loud enough to be heard 3 counties over. I pressed the talk button. The feedback squealed for a second, and before my voice boomed out over the scrapyard, rolling like thunder across the wet metal. "Lucas," I said. My son flinched. He looked around, trying to find the voice of God. "Look at you." I continued, my voice calm and heavy. You are sitting in the mud, surrounded by trash. Is this what you sold your soul for? Is this what you sold your father for? He did not answer. He just buried his face in his hands. Tiffany stood up. She shouted at the sky. Let us out of here, Jerry. You made your point. Let us out and we will leave. We will disappear. I ignored her. I was not talking to the snake. I was talking to the mouse it had swallowed. I looked at the thermal screen. I saw the heat signatures of sirens approaching from the main road. The cavalry was coming. But I had one last thing to say. Lucas, look at me, I commanded. He looked up. The rain was washing the tears off his face. I spent 40 years working with high voltage, I said. I learned one thing. You cannot control the lightning, but you can control where it grounds. You chose to ground yourself with these people. You chose the path of least resistance. And now you are shocked that you got burned. I paused, letting the words sink in. I did not teach my son to become a criminal. I did not raise you to be a mule for terrorists. But since you refused to learn how to be a man, I will teach you the last lesson I have left. I leaned into the microphone. I will teach you how to pay the price. The sirens were close now. I could see the blue and red lights flashing through the trees near the front gate. Tiffany heard them too. The blood drained from her face. She realized that the magnetic cage was not just a trap. It was a holding cell. I was serving them up on a silver platter. Panic set in. Lucas scrambled to his feet. He looked at the wall of twisted metal and crushed cars that surrounded them. He looked at the flashing lights approaching the gate. He made a choice. The wrong choice. He tried to climb. He grabbed onto the jagged edge of a car door that was stuck to the magnet. He pulled himself up, trying to scramble over the top of the barricade, trying to run into the darkness of the woods. "Lucas, stop!" I shouted over the PA. "Do not run." He didn't listen. He was driven by pure animal fear. He climbed higher, slipping on the wet metal, cutting his hands on the rusted steel. He reached the top of the pile. He was ready to jump down into the shadows. But he was too late. The night suddenly turned into day. Floodlights erupted from the perimeter of the scrapyard. 4 massive beams of white light cut through the rain, pinning Lucas to the top of the scrap pile like a moth on a display board. The sound of heavy diesel engines roared as the FBI tactical vehicles smashed through the remains of the front gate. The voice of a federal agent boomed from a megaphone on the ground, overpowering the sound of the rain. "Federal agents, drop your weapons and get on the ground. Do it now." Lucas froze. He stood there atop the mountain of trash, his silhouette framed by the blinding light. He looked back at the cabin of the crane one last time. I took my hand off the microphone. I sat back in the operator chair. My shoulder was burning, my hand was throbbing, but I felt a strange sense of peace. The circuit was complete. The fuse had blown, and the darkness was finally being pushed back by the light. The bright white lights of the FBI tactical team flooded the scrapyard, turning the rainy night into a blinding stage. I sat up in the crane cabin, my hand still resting on the control lever. Below me, the scene was chaotic but controlled. The agents moved with the precision of a machine gun closing a perimeter. They were shouting orders, their voices amplified by megaphones demanding surrender. I watched the people trapped in my magnetic cage. They were like rats exposed to sudden sunlight. The mercenaries had dropped to their knees, their hands laced behind their heads. They knew the game was over. They knew that fighting federal agents was a different equation than bullying an old man. But Tiffany was not built for surrender. I watched her through the glass. She was cornered, mud-stained, and furious. She looked at the wall of agents, and then she looked up at me one last time. Her eyes were black holes of hate. She shouted something I could not hear over the roar of the engines, but I could read her lips. She promised to kill me. The lead agent called up to me on the PA system, instructing me to disengage the magnet. He wanted the suspects on the ground, not floating in a suspended prison of scrap metal. I nodded slowly. I gripped the lever. I had to be careful. If I cut the power instantly, tons of steel would crash down and crush them. I had to lower the arm first, then gently reduce the voltage. I pushed the joystick. The crane arm descended, groaning under the weight. The cage of cars and rebar touched the muddy ground. I slowly dialed back the power. 10%. 5%. 0. The hum of the magnet died. The invisible force that held the metal together evaporated. The cars slumped. The rifles and knives that had been stuck to the magnet face clattered down onto the hoods of the SUVs. That was the moment Tiffany chose to die. Or at least she chose to try. As the metal fell around her, creating a distraction, she did not put her hands up. She reached into her boot. I had missed it. I had seen the ankle holster on myself, but I had underestimated her paranoia. She had a backup piece, a small compact revolver tucked into her designer boot. She pulled it out. She did not aim at the agents. She knew she could not win that fight. She aimed at Lucas. If she was going down, she was going to take the loose end with her. She was going to silence the witness. Lucas was standing there, bewildered, his hands half raised when he saw his wife point the gun at his chest. His eyes went wide. He did not move. He was paralyzed by the betrayal. But the FBI sniper positioned on the roof of the tactical truck was not paralyzed. A single shot rang out. It was sharp and dry like a whip crack. I saw the impact. It hit Tiffany in the shoulder, spinning her around violently. She dropped the gun and fell into the mud, screaming. It was not a fatal shot. It was a disabling shot. Professional. Clean. The agents swarmed in. They tackled the mercenaries. They handcuffed Tiffany, dragging her away while medics rushed in to pack her wound. She was thrashing and cursing, spitting venom at everyone who touched her. And then there was Lucas. 2 agents grabbed him. They spun him around and slammed him against the hood of the crushed SUV. They pulled his arms behind his back. I heard the metallic click of the handcuffs even from 40 feet up. It was a sound of finality. I powered down the crane. The diesel generator shuddered and died, leaving only the sound of the rain and the shouting. I opened the cab door and climbed down the ladder. My body felt heavy. The adrenaline was leaving my system, replacing the energy with a deep, bone-weary exhaustion. My shoulder was burning. My thumb was throbbing, and I felt every single one of my 78 years. When my boots hit the ground, an agent approached me. He had a badge on his chest and a look of respect in his eyes. He asked if I was injured. I told him I would live. I walked past him toward the center of the yard. I had to sign the papers. I had to hand over the evidence. As I walked past the line of patrol cars, I saw him. Lucas was sitting in the back of a squad car. The door was open while an agent cataloged his personal effects. He looked up and saw me. He looked like a child who had fallen off his bike. His face was streaked with mud and tears. His expensive suit was ruined. His life was ruined. "Dad," he croaked. I stopped. I did not walk over to him. I stood 10 feet away, separated by a puddle of oily water. "Dad, please," he said, his voice breaking. "You have to tell them. I was forced. Tiffany made me do it. I can testify against her. Just tell them I am victim, Dad. Please. I am your son." I looked at him. I looked for the boy I used to carry on my shoulders. I looked for the young man I taught to drive that red truck. I looked for the person I had loved more than my own life. But I did not find him. I only saw a man who had put a tracker on my car. I saw a man who had stood by while his wife threatened to burn me alive. I saw a man who had chosen money over blood. I stepped closer. The agent stepped in front of me instinctively, but I waved him off. I just wanted to say one thing. I leaned down so my face was level with his. "You are not a victim, Lucas," I said softly. "You are a volunteer. You volunteered to sell me out. You volunteered to break the law. and now you are volunteering to pay the price. But Dad, he sobbed, reaching out with his cuffed hands. I am sorry. I love you. I stood up straight. The rain washed the blood off my coat. I loved the son I raised, I said. But that son died the moment you signed that shipping manifest. I do not know who you are. I turned my back on him. Dad, wait, Dad, don't leave me, he screamed. I walked away. I did not look back. I walked to the lead agent and handed him the burner phone with the recordings. I handed him the location of the real chips, which I had hidden, not in the scrapyard, but in a locker at the bus station, 3 towns over. I signed the witness statement. My hand was shaking, but my signature was clear. Gerald Kowalski. The ambulance arrived to look at my shoulder. As they loaded me in, I watched the convoy of police cars drive away, carrying the wreckage of my family to federal prison. I closed my eyes, and for the first time in 3 days, I slept. 12 months later. The sun in Florida is different than the sun in Detroit. It is heavier, warmer. It feels like a blanket. I sat on the end of a wooden pier, my legs dangling over the turquoise water. The air smelled of salt and jasmine. There was no smell of ozone, no smell of hydraulic fluid, no smell of fear. I held a fishing rod in my hands. It was a new rod. My old gear was gone, left behind in the life I had walked away from. I lived in a small bungalow now near the coast. It was quiet. I had a neighbor named Bill who was a retired Navy mechanic. We drank coffee in the mornings and argued about engine timings. It was a good life. A simple life. My shoulder still stiffened up when it rained. The scar was a thick purple knot, a permanent reminder of the night I went to war. My thumb had healed, but it clicked when I reeled in a big fish. I heard footsteps on the wood planks behind me. It was the mailman. He knew I fished here every morning. "Letter for you, Jerry," he said, handing me a white envelope. I took it. I saw the return address stamped in red ink. Department of Corrections, State Penitentiary. My heart skipped a beat. Just one beat. I looked at the handwriting. It was Lucas's. It was shaky, frantic scrawl. I sat there holding the letter. The paper felt heavy in my hand, heavier than a lead pipe. I knew what was inside. Pages of apologies, pages of excuses, probably a request for money for the commissary or a plea for me to speak at his parole hearing in 5 years. He wanted absolution. He wanted his father to tell him that it was okay, that he was forgiven, that we could go back to the way things were. I looked at the water. The waves were gentle, rhythmic washing against the pilings. I thought about opening it. I thought about reading his words. Maybe he had changed. Maybe prison had scared the selfishness out of him. Maybe he really was sorry. But then I remembered the sound of the zip ties tightening on my wrists. I remembered the look in his eyes when he tried to climb over the scrap pile, leaving me behind to face the music. Forgiveness is a powerful thing. But forgiveness does not mean access. You can forgive a snake for biting you because that is its nature. But you do not put your hand back in the cage. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my lighter. It was an old Zippo, windproof and reliable. I flicked the wheel. Du chasson. The flame jumped to life, dancing in the sea breeze. I held the corner of the envelope to the flame. The paper curled and blackened. The fire ate the return address. It ate the stamp. It ate the name Lucas Kowalski. I watched the fire consume the words I would never read. I felt no guilt. I felt no regret. I just felt a weight lifting off my chest, carrying away on the smoke. When the fire reached my fingertips, I dropped the burning paper into the ocean. It hissed as it hit the water, turning into a small black smudge that drifted away with the tide. I picked up my fishing rod. I cast the line out far into the blue water. I am 79 years old. I have a few good years left, and I am going to spend them with people who do not need to be reminded to love me. Because I learned the hard way that family is not about the blood that flows in your veins. That is just biology. That is just an accident of birth. True family is about respect. It is about loyalty. It is about showing up when the house is on fire, not being the one holding the match. When respect is gone, when trust is broken, all you have left is a shared last name, and a name is not enough to keep you warm at night. I reeled in my line, feeling a tug, a fish, a fighter. I smiled. I was alone, but I was not lonely. I was free. Thank you for listening to my story. It was not an easy one to tell, but it was a necessary one to live. If you have someone in your life who is using your love as a weapon, do not wait until you are tied to a pillar to cut them loose. Save yourself. You are worth more than what they can take from you. If this story resonated with you, let me know in the comments. Where are you listening from? What would you have done with the letter? I read every single comment. And if you want to support an old electrician and his fishing habit, you can hit that like button or share this story with someone who needs to hear it. Take care of yourselves. And remember, watch your back, because sometimes the people standing behind you are the ones holding the knife. See you in the next story. With respect. Many of you in the comments have been asking for an update. You want to know the specifics. You want to know if the justice system actually worked, or if money bought them a way out. Well, I am a man who believes in finishing the job. So here is the final chapter of the saga. It has been 2 years since that night in the scrapyard. 2 years since I watched my son being handcuffed in the rain. I did not attend the trial. I had no interest in sitting in a cold courtroom, staring at the back of Lucas's head, while high-priced lawyers tried to argue that treason was just a misunderstanding. But I read the transcripts, every single word. The trial of Tiffany and Lucas Kowalski was the headline of every paper in Detroit for 3 weeks. They called it the Iron Web case. Tiffany tried to turn on everyone. That was her strategy. She offered to give up the names of her buyers, the logistics routes, the offshore accounts. She thought she was the smartest person in the room until the very end. But she forgot one rule of the criminal underworld. You do not snitch on people who own surface-to-air missiles. On the 3rd day of the trial, her lawyer was found in his car at the bottom of the Detroit River. It was ruled an accident, but the message was clear. Tiffany stopped talking. She went silent. And without a plea deal, the federal prosecutors tore her apart. The evidence from the tracker I sent to Canada, combined with the recordings from my burner phone and the recovered chips from the scrapyard, was overwhelming. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours. Tiffany was convicted on 20 counts, including arms trafficking, racketeering, and conspiracy to commit domestic terrorism. She was sentenced to 40 years in a federal supermax facility without the possibility of parole. I saw a photo of her leaving the courthouse. The arrogant, untouchable executive was gone. In her place was a woman who looked aged and hollow, wearing an orange jumpsuit that clashed with her pale skin. She looked like exactly what she was, a shipping container for misery. And then there was Lucas, my son. His defense was pathetic. He tried to play the victim. He claimed he was coerced. He claimed he didn't know what was in the packages. He claimed he was just trying to pay off a gambling debt and got in over his head. But the prosecutor played the recording. The one where he begged me to give him the keys. The one where he admitted to embezzlement. The one where he chose to climb the scrap pile to save himself instead of helping his wife or his father. The judge was an old man, a stern man who reminded me a bit of myself. He looked at Lucas over his reading glasses and said something that stuck with me. "Mr. Kowalski," he said, "you are not a criminal mastermind. You are something far more dangerous. You are a weak man, and weak men create hard times for everyone around them because they refuse to carry their own burdens." Lucas got 15 years. He is currently serving his time in a medium-security prison in Ohio. I am told he works in the laundry unit. He folds sheets. Maybe the repetitive work will give him time to think about the fabric of his life and where the stains started. As for me, I am done with the past. I do not visit. I do not write. I keep the line cut. But nature abhors a vacuum. When you remove something toxic, you make room for something healthy to grow. I mentioned I live in Florida now. I spend my days fishing and fixing up my bungalow. But a man like me cannot sit still for too long. My hands need to work. They need to solve problems. About 6 months ago, I was at the local hardware store buying some marine varnish. I saw a young man arguing with the manager. He was about 19, scrawny, wearing clothes that had seen better days. He was trying to return a set of cheap tools that had broken on the first use. The manager was giving him a hard time, calling him clumsy. The kid looked ready to cry, but he stood his ground. He said, "I did not misuse them, sir. I am trying to fix my grandmother's air conditioner. I need the refund to buy better parts." I watched him. I saw the grease under his fingernails. I saw the calluses on his palms. I saw the desperation of someone trying to do the right thing with the wrong equipment. I walked over. I put my hand on the counter. I told the manager to process the refund. Then I turned to the kid. "What is your name, son?" I asked. "Mateo," he said, looking at me suspiciously. I took him to the aisle with the professional grade tools. I pulled a set of Klein screwdrivers and a Fluke multimeter off the shelf. Expensive stuff. The kind of tools you buy once and keep for a lifetime. I put them in his basket. He shook his head. "I cannot afford these, sir." "I know," I said. "That is why I am buying them for you. But there is a condition." He stiffened. He was used to people wanting something in return. "What is the condition?" he asked, his eyes narrowing. I pointed to his truck outside. An old beaten-up Chevy that sounded like it was running on 3 cylinders. "The condition is that you come by my place on Saturday mornings. I am going to teach you how to use these tools properly. And we are going to fix that truck of yours before it explodes." Mateo looked at me for a long time. He was looking for the catch. He was looking for the lie. But he didn't find one. "I will be there," he said. That was 6 months ago. Mateo is a good kid. He is smart. He listens. He asks questions. He doesn't look for shortcuts. Last week we rewired his grandmother's entire house. When we flipped the main breaker and the lights came on without flickering, the smile on his face was brighter than any bulb. He calls me Mr. Jerry. He brings me tamales that his grandmother makes. He respects my silence when I have a bad day. I am not his father. He has a father somewhere who ran off years ago, and he is not my son. But he is family, because family is what you build. It is the people who show up. It is the people who want to learn from you, not steal from you. I recently visited a lawyer here in town. I updated my will. Lucas is not in it. Instead, I have set up the Kowalski Trade Scholarship. When I pass on my assets, the money from the sale of my house in Detroit, my pension savings, everything will go into a fund. It will pay for tuition and tools for young men and women in Detroit and Florida who want to become electricians, plumbers, and mechanics. I want to leave behind a legacy of builders. I want to help the kids who have calluses on their hands and grease on their clothes, the ones the world overlooks. Because the world does not need more CFOs who embezzle money. It does not need more logistics managers who smuggle weapons. It needs people who can keep the lights on. It needs people who can fix what is broken. Yesterday, Mateo asked me why I was helping him. We were under the hood of his truck, replacing the alternator. My hands were dirty, and my bad shoulder was aching, but I felt good. I wiped my hands on a rag and looked at him. "Because someone helped me once," I said. "And because I want to make sure that when I am gone, the tools are in good hands." He nodded. He didn't say anything else. He just went back to tightening the bolt. That is enough for me. So if you are listening to this and you feel alone, if you feel like your family has betrayed you, if you feel like you are surrounded by people who take and take, Stop giving. Cut the wire. Walk away. It will be painful. It will be the hardest thing you ever do, but it is the only way to save yourself. And once you are free, look around. Look for the people who are trying to fix things. Look for the people who respect the work. That is your tribe. That is your future. My name is Jerry Kowalski. I am a master electrician. I survived my family, and I am finally living my life. When I look back on my own story, I understand a painful truth. My biggest mistake wasn't being betrayed. It was staying too long after the warning signs were already there. If I can offer you one piece of advice, it's this: don't be like me. Don't wait until trust collapses, until silence becomes fear before you choose yourself. For years, I believed family should be protected at all costs. But God taught me that love does not mean blindness. God never asks us to sacrifice our safety or our dignity to preserve a lie. And God gave me the strength to understand that boundaries are not cruelty, they are wisdom. This is more than a family story. It's a reminder that loyalty without respect becomes a trap. Many grandpa stories exist not to spread bitterness, but to warn those who think endurance equals virtue. A family story only deserves that name when honesty and accountability are present, and grandpa stories are meant to pass down hard-earned truths, not silence. Here's the lesson I learned. Choose truth over comfort, boundaries over guilt, and integrity over fear. These grandpa stories are not about revenge, they are about survival. And every family story reaches a turning point, where walking away becomes the only way forward. If this story resonated with you, please leave a comment, share your thoughts, and subscribe to the channel for more family story reflections. Thank you for staying with me until the very end. And a final note. Upcoming stories may include fictionalized elements created for educational and storytelling purposes. If that's not for you, feel free to step away and choose content that better fits your needs.